Editor here. This is a re-release of a previous episode. The original episode was a discussion done by the Green Team Malazan team about Malazan, but in reality it was more like a discussion/lecture about narrative, fiction, literature, and more. We felt like it deserved to be listened to by more than those who have read Malazan, so we re-edited it omitting spoilers. Please enjoy. Hello, and welcome to Legendarium's Green Team Malazan team. We're doing another very special episode today. Last time we talked to the author, friend of the podcast, Steve Erickson. Today we're talking to the real genius behind the Malazan series, the man who refuses to accept any praise about that comes his way, Dr. A.P. Canavan.
Hello.
AP has a PhD in dragons, and he's known for talking about/teaching narrative on YouTube as a critical dragon. Seriously, it's good stuff. I've watched nearly all of his videos, and I've learned so much from him. Thank you for that, AP. It's a real pleasure to talk to you instead of just writing comments on your videos.
It's fantastic to be here, and people, because this is a podcast, can't see how badly I am now blushing.
He's not blushing at all.
From that glowing introduction. I have fun talking about narrative elements. I'm certainly not setting up like proper lectures or anything. And I am most definitely not the brains behind the Malazan thing. That's Esselmont and Erickson all the way. I'm a parasite living off their work.
Can't accept praise.
The so-called fantasy master is refusing to accept praise.
So what are we going to be talking about today?
Nothing past the first 5 books, but mostly I think we're just going to we're just going to talk and talk. We know you're good at talking.
Shoot the proverbial. That's what you were reaching for there.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, okay. See, I was most interested in hearing. You've listened to the episodes, right?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't make notes. I didn't realize I was going to get quiz. Episode 4, fine. Panda said this. Do you agree? I'm like, which one was episode 4? Let me check my notes.
Panda did compare Malazan favorably to the Transformers, so.
This episode's not about Malazan. This is an episode about us talking about Malazan.
Yeah. I was just wondering if you had any large disagreements with us on any of the things we said that come to mind.
Yeah, you're all wrong all the time. That's obvious. And
who's the most wrong?
The thing is, and this is the thing. You guys, you're reading the books. Obviously, some first-time readers, some rereaders. You have your own personal experience of it. Mm-hmm. And you're reading the books, and you pick up, because of your background, other books that you have read, your level of education, the cultures that you've absorbed into you. There are things in these books that are going to be important to you. And there are ways of you interpreting the text. And that is very, very personal to you. So no one can say, oh no, you're wrong to have that feeling. You're wrong to have that experience. You go, no, that is your experience. That's your reader experience. It's deeply personal to you. So that's the first point. The second point is, a lot of these books, Erickson constructed in such a way that we have a lot of room, a lot of narrative space in and around concepts that there's ambiguity. And that ambiguity is there very specifically to allow a reader room for their own personal interpretation, because that's what Erickson wants. He wants a reader to be engaged and to think about the text and to have their own, I suppose, in modern day internet parlance, their own take. Be it hot or lukewarm, and it's a vital part of reading. Is you inhabit these spaces that the author creates to allow you to draw out this information. And for when you have read the books and you've read all 10 and you're rereading them, your experience is actually, in a lot of respects, very, very different because you have a different context for it. It's almost like it becomes a different narrative. And so disagreeing that, it's not that you didn't understand. It's you're going through a process. You're on a journey. And when you get to the end of that journey and you look back on it, you go, oh, I have a completely different view on that now. It's not that your original view was wrong. That was your view at the time. It was true to how you believed at the time. But when you get to the end, you reevaluate, you recontextualize. And that is very, very important. So it's not that I disagree with what you think, or I think that you're wrong. That's never the thing. I might have a different opinion, and my opinion is based on all of those things for me and for the things that I've studied and the things that I've done. But the whole point of literature, the whole point of discourse is to take varied opinions, discuss them, almost like in a podcast format, and talk about the things that you like or dislike, why you like them, why you dislike them, why you reacted. Because it's not just I didn't like, because no one learns from that. That is a very immature is probably too pejorative, but I didn't like that, that's bad, is a very simplified form of reasoning. But if you go, I didn't like that, and the reason I didn't like it is, and you explain that, it's like giving your working out in a mathematics problem. You go, here's the question, here's all my working out, here's my answer. And someone can look at that and go, in your working out, you did this and this. Those are assumptions that you have made, and those assumptions may get challenged later on in the series. So that would be the points that I'd raise about this. I may have different takes on things, I may have different appreciations of things, but that doesn't invalidate your response.
That was very well put.
That's all well and good, but it makes for terrible podcast drama.
All right, sorry.
Yeah, now that you got all the caveats out of the way, who do you actually disagree with?
Oh, well, Hurinfan and Ashaman are clearly always wrong, because they're sitting there going, oh, we know everything. And yeah, they're terrible.
Perfect.
They know nothing. They're like the Malazan equivalent of Jon Snow. You know nothing.
Oh my god. That's amazing.
So earlier, you, in your long ramble, you said that the way that Erickson wrote it in the way that he intends for us to read it and interpret it, right? So what do you think is the way that he doesn't want us to read it? And so our listeners can do that.
Okay, well, number one, I am wounded to the quick that you called that a long ramble. That was a short ramble. That was a ramblette.
Yeah, listeners of your channel will understand that.
But okay, so let's go to a prime example of this is you can see in the opening with and in that when he goes and everyone going, oh, this is terrible, he's awful, I don't like this character, he's going to kill children. You are literally at the start of a book. Stop looking at the superficial things. Stop reading just on the surface. Wait until you get to find out what is going on before you go, I'm throwing this book. Erickson is a terrible person.
If you're saying that depiction is not endorsement.
Yeah, inclusion is not endorsement. And that is one of the first things that everyone, when you are reading, you go, inclusion is not endorsement. Sometimes you include bad characters or you include situations in a certain way because you want to highlight them. So I think is a great example of this because people go, I really don't like him because he does these things. You go, right, yeah. Erickson isn't holding him up as a paragon of virtue. Nothing in the text is telling you that he is a paragon of virtue. Why do you insist that, oh, well, he shouldn't have done that? Of course he shouldn't have done that. It's bad. So the simplified, superficial reading of texts is a plague on what I studied and what I'm passionate about, which is like a deeper appreciation of literature. And yeah, there are books that I love that are very much in that top layer of what you can glean from a text. It's about the narrative events. It's about the things that you're being told. And we can enjoy those. We can have fun with those. But you don't apply that same reading and understanding to works that are written in a completely different way. So that would be, and I don't like speaking on Erickson's behalf. I am not his spokesperson or his mouthpiece or whatever. He is very much his own person, and he and I have disagreements. But reading is a very complex act. And different books play into different aspects of narrative. Some have a lot of superficial and surface level information. Some rely a lot on subtext. Some rely on contraindicators and contrasting events to show a hidden truth that gets revealed because you're taking two disparate elements and seeing the contrast between them. And if you applied the same technique only to all reading, that's why a whole load of books, you go, well, this book didn't make any sense. And you go, yeah, you were reading that book, which is deeply complex and thematic and about all of these things. And you were looking at it going, but nothing really happened in it. Congratulations, you've read Jane Eyre. Nothing happens really in Jane Eyre. But we don't have this. But think about it. When people complain about, say, in Deadhouse Gates, and they're talking about the chain of dogs, nothing happens for the whole of the chain of dogs until the end. Really, nothing happens. There's a whole load of dialogue scenes. There's confrontations and internal politics. There are battle sequences. There are all of these little incidents that occur during the chain of dogs. And they go, yeah, but not enough. There wasn't enough big things happening. But you don't have that complaint about Pride and Prejudice or Jane Eyre, where it's a novel of manners, or where they're looking at these, when two people meet, that can be really important. But because that is in a different genre, we apply a different sort of controls. We believe it's a different paradigm, and yet it is all literature. All of these different techniques can be applied in different ways across different narratives.
I was thinking that I recently read Rejoice, A Knife to the Heart, and I enjoyed it a lot. But the whole time I was thinking, wow, like a lot of people are really not going to like this book because, quote, nothing happens.
I like Rejoice. I actually really like Rejoice. And one of the things about Rejoice that made me, it haunted me for months afterwards, because it was trying to get at what is the essential problem on Earth. Take all of the different aspects of the human condition. If you remove one of them, does that change things? If you remove a different thing, does that change things? And people are looking at it going, oh, it's just Erickson sweeping in with a Deus Ex Machina to explain blah, 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 this. And then there's no conflict. There's no boom, science fiction invasion, lots of things exploding. And you go, yeah, it's not Independence Day. Not every book about first contact has to be Independence Day or any of the other Hollywood blockbusters that anytime an alien arrives for whatever reason, it's, yes, let's kill all the Earthlings.
It reminded me a lot of Childhood's End or Arrival.
Yep. Childhood's End is, I think, was a significant influence on that. And Erickson wanted his own spin. He wanted to think about it his own way, because so many of the modern first contact situations are done in terms of the Earth is being invaded. They're all invasion narratives, and it's a lot. When you take that, if you think of why are invasion narratives so popular, and then you think of, say, racial tensions or political tensions about the fear of the invader, of xenophobia being literalized and playing into a current social anxiety. And we see it in the Victorian era. The Victorians were obsessed with that. All these different time periods in history. It's not a new thing just to us. It's not a new thing just to one particular culture in one particular moment. Because I know some people reacted to it and, oh, Erickson was talking about this thing. And you go, no, he wasn't. You're taking your understanding of what he was talking about and you're applying it to the one element or the big example that you know and saying it must be that thing. Right. But look at how the Romans reacted to, we are Roman citizens, and look at these other people who have now part of the empire are they considered Roman? Well, they're not true Romans. They're diluting what it is to be Roman. And there was a separate legal system for non-Roman citizens that ultimately ended up conferring better benefits on them in the long run. And it was the evolution of how law sort of evolved in Europe. But that was a concern in the Roman Empire. And we are sometimes so, not necessarily short-sighted, because short-sighted, again, is implying a negative. But we take what we know and we map it onto a text and go, that's what the author must have been talking about because I can see it. I can see it really, really clearly. And therefore, we are unknowingly assuming that the author has the same point of view as us, that has the same knowledge base as us. And that's an element I've seen in a lot of modern readers when they read fantasy in of any kind, that they take their knowledge based in today and they're taking a text, a science fiction or fantasy text that maybe was written 40 years ago, and they're applying today's paradigm and going, but according to what I know, this is wrong. But was it wrong 40 years ago in the culture in which that author was writing?
Right. Yeah.
And you go, it might have been.
I'm always curious about the background of the author. And we have this discussion before on our Discord where it's like, does it matter, what kind of person the author is? Does that impact how you're reading their text? Should it? For me, I'm always curious, like, what is the background of this author? Like, what context and experiences does this author bring and is impacting what their creative output is? So yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to look at a piece of work in context.
And that's one of the, if you think of, okay, let's explore this a different way. So you think it's important to look at the author, and I agree with you. I think it's very important to add that element in because it helps us understand the text better. Mm-hmm. But you can also understand someone saying, but a text should be able to stand on its own.
Sure.
And I should be able to read this text. I can read a text from the 17th century. And I should just be able to appreciate that text. I shouldn't have to know about the author. And you can understand that perspective as well. And part of what we had in the 20th century was a rise in a form of criticism where it was, instead of assuming that the author's intent about a text was the default, it was the one way to read a text, and all others were minor variants. But the truth of the text was the author's intent. And we destabilized that notion. The author is dead. It wasn't that you went, the author no longer exists.
Right.
It's that the author was no longer the default for how you understood a text, because you can have a sort of triangle of understanding where you have what is actually written in the text, which is fixed. You have the author and the context in which the text was written and all that biographical information, which is a different point. And then you have the reader, because the reader is a third point on this text. Mm-hmm. Because while the text is fixed, when you read something, you create the narrative. You give it meaning, you give it life. And depending on who you are, what stage of life you're at in your life experiences, that will change the meaning of the text, even though the text is fixed. And if you then return to that book 30 years later, are you then, are you still the same person? Are you going to get exactly the same thing from it? And you go, no, it changes. You go, but how can that be? How can the text change if you reread it 30 years later? And it's because you're different. You have different life experiences, different things that you've encountered, more education or a deeper understanding of different topics. And if the text has remained exactly the same, because it's still the same printed text, the author hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is the reader. So there's a new interpretation of the text based solely on your experience. But it's still one of those points. It's still part of it. So it is a very, it is of course valid to say my understanding of the text is the one that's most important to me. But it is one of multiple ways of looking at a text and understanding a text. And your understanding of a text is not fixed. It is not absolute. And it will change over time. And if it changes over time, the author's intent is about the only thing that remains relatively constant in terms of intent and meaning. The text itself remains fixed, but it doesn't have meaning inherent to itself because meaning has to be created through consciousness. And therefore, that's why you have this tension between what the author intended or what the author was talking about and the reader. But the reader never remains fixed. So that's why there's this tension. There was a rise to get rid of the author as the defining thing and to bring in a more sort of democratic approach to the understanding of text, because it is about how the reader interprets it. But with that, we have to understand that your reading of the text is never fixed, is never authoritative, and will change over time.
Yeah, which is also why I'm afraid to go back and reread childhood favorites, just in fear of tainting the joy that I had, the nostalgia that I have for those texts.
Like what? Give me a childhood favorite.
I really love Ella Enchanted by Gail Carson Levine, a Cinderella retelling. And I think it will hold up.
It holds up.
Okay. But I haven't reread it in I don't know, over a decade, maybe 2 decades. So it's something that is so dear and close to my heart, but I'm just afraid like if I read it, I'm gonna be like seeing all the flaws. Now that I'm an
There,
adult.
there are quite a few movies that I go back and rewatch and like it less every single time.
Vis-a-vis Death of the Author, I think that probably it's a bad name for what it's trying to accomplish, because I think that a lot of people in the mainstream, not in academia, have interpreted it as, okay, we throw out the author entirely. Their intentions and their views don't matter at all. And I've had conversations with a lot of these people, but I think that introduces something problematic, being that like someone can interpret something, I think, completely incorrectly, and like at a certain point, it just becomes a complete misunderstanding of the text. Like, if we were to read House of Chains as an endorsement of female genital mutilation and pedophilia, like that is, I'm sorry, that's not what House of Chains was about.
How dare you contradict my reading of it? But, and again, it is, people, we have a tendency, and we all do this, that we like simple, straightforward answers. We like simple, straightforward positions, and building in nuance or building in ambiguity or building in the fact that it is not a fixed position that it will move. That is always slightly uncomfortable because the ground is never completely firm under your feet. So when we say things like, oh, your reading experience is valid, it is your reading experience, but that doesn't mean that you can't misread something. And I'll give you an example of like a big mistake I made. I watched the film The Prestige when it came out in the cinema. And I misread, as we were watching the film, I misread one of the scenes. I misinterpreted one of the scenes. And I came out and I had like the most complex theory about what had actually happened on the screen. And the person I was with took one look at me and went, AP, you're an idiot. It's this thing. And I was like, but how? And I couldn't work it through in my head. I rewatched the film a couple of years later and went, God, I'm an idiot. It's clearly this. And we are fallible. We are mere mortals. We do make mistakes. And that has to be built into your understanding of things as well. That you can actually be wrong. But the insistence that this is my reading of a text, and therefore my reading of text is absolutely valid and cannot be wrong. You go, the cannot be wrong thing wasn't part of the original formulation of this. You can still be wrong. But I don't think the Death of the Author was badly named. I think it's a fantastic name because we're still talking about essentially an academic essay in a very small, tiny aspect of literary theory that was written quite some time ago, and everyone knows about it. Do they fully understand it? No, but they all know it. It's a brilliant name. That's branding.
True. Yeah, branding is important. I like Steve's Author is the Living Dead.
That's a good essay.
And it is, people misapply it. And, I could say, oh, well, that's because they haven't studied it. They need to study it in order. And you go, well, no, but the general concepts are still fine. Most people generally apply it normally. It's when people use it as a defense for something in order to, as if create an academic background and basis and sort of this, I'm referring to this authority and that gives my argument more weight. And you go, yeah, but you're misapplying it. That's where there's a problem arises. It's not about ignoring authorial intent. It's about reducing the importance and primacy of authorial intent and understanding that meaning is destabilized because it's about interpretation by the receiver of the information, and that receiver is an imperfect vessel and also someone who changes over time. And that's not a particularly catchy title for an article, is it?
How about interpretational earthquakes?
No.
What?
Well, unstable ground, right? And changing meanings. It's catchy,
No.
No, I'm going with
no.
Death of the Author on this one. It's much catchier. It's a sexy title.
Okay, speaking about sex.
Provocative.
Okay, so what are your opinions on the tension between an author writing their artistic vision and an author compromising that vision in order to write what sells? Not that popular media is necessarily bad, but for example, Steve likes his exposition style, and a lot of people don't like his exposition style, and that perhaps turns a lot of people off his books. Similarly, a lot of people really like his battles, and now he does not want to write any more battles. Should Steve write more battles?
Well, this is always a tension in any art. You have these battling concepts of what art is for, and for an artist not to starve. Obviously, they like to get paid. They like to earn a living, and what I think a lot of artists and authors and all sorts of artistic endeavors, what they truly hope for is that their expression of their art is going to find an audience that will appreciate it, that will pay for it, and will allow them to make a living on it. But the idea that you then, well, okay, I can make this more commercial and sell more, sometimes that is a pragmatic and practical solution to things. Other ways of thinking about it, and not thinking about quite in that paradigm, is, right, this style has fallen out of favor. Why don't I use one of the more popular styles? Because I can use that to generate or create this piece of art that will have a stronger resonance with the audience. Because I still want them to enjoy this, but why don't I give it to them in a form that they can enjoy more? And that, that's another way of looking at it. Or you could look at it very cynically, which is, the audience all like this. Why don't I just give them what they want, regardless of whether or not I believe in it and I want to express that. I want money. I will produce a product for them. And that, again, as much as it feels wrong, is actually like a very valid response to these things. Modern authors, a lot of them, have to make a living. And you don't have to just choose one of these. There's, again, movement between these different positions. And you might choose to alter things in a certain way because you want to communicate with your audience. And if the form of communication that you used to use, the style that you used to use, is no longer doing that effectively, then perhaps you can modify your approach, your style, to make it easier for your current audience to understand. And that's not compromising your artistic integrity. It's going to your mission of, I'm trying to communicate my art. Turning it into a commodification and going, I'm going to start with a position of, this is what they want and that's what I am going to create, is a different way of looking at it. It's sort of reversing the poles on it. But, it's the modern day. We live in a capitalist society. People still need a roof over their heads and food in their mouths. Are you really going to blame authors for trying to talk to their audiences and engage their audiences with a product that they might like? And with that, you can then go, I will give them what they want, but I'm going to sneak in. Like giving a child vegetables mixed into their food. I'm going to sneak in some good stuff with something maybe that is much more commercial and doesn't have a whole load of narrative content, calories, and good stuff in it. I'm going to sneak stuff into that to try and improve it. And no one is saying that any one of these approaches is wrong. Like, everyone has their reason for doing it, and they have these different approaches for a reason. And we respond to these texts in different ways. Some books I really like, other books I don't like. I have personal preferences about style and what's in them. And that's how you find an audience. That's how you respond to an audience.
Nice.
And now everyone is quiet.
I would say, I think the commercialization aspect has kind of like taken over Hollywood, if I'm going to transition this from books to movies. Honestly, I can't say they're wrong, because cynically made Marvel movies sell. Cynically made other movies sell. Guess what didn't sell? The Last Duel. A very compelling story, I think, about the last judicial duel in France.
But hang on a sec. The director told us The Last Duel didn't sell because it was a whole
it was
bunch
millennials.
of millennials on their phones.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, that's...
Wait,
sorry.
seriously?
Yeah, he blamed millennials who have had cell phones their whole lives. Not true.
Yeah, that is not true.
And went on this rant about it, and he was refusing to blame Fox and Disney for not promoting it. Well, the first I heard of this movie was seeing Ridley Scott say that I'm an for not having watched it. So
Wow.
that's how well. Sorry for people who have to edit this that I just cursed, but
It's fine.
yeah.
To our listeners, watch The Last Duel. It's really good.
I
It's
want
really
to
haven't seen
see
yet.
it.
I hadn't heard about it until, as Yazza just said, until that article came out, and I went, I had heard nothing about this film, and it sounds really interesting.
You would almost certainly enjoy it.
Well, it also didn't help that it came out in the midst of like a lot of bigger films, and people were just starting to feel comfortable going back into theaters.
Yeah.
Let's also be honest. It's a period piece rape drama, so I don't think there's a big audience for that.
Well, a period historical drama in the middle of a pandemic that wasn't marketed particularly well or obviously, and you go, yeah, but it's the cell phones that are the issue.
But it's the millennials. Excuse you.
They should put down their avocado toast and head to the theater.
Yes, they should put down their avocado toast. That's an abomination under the sun.
I
Avocado
like my
toast is
avocado
wrong.
toast.
I've never seen avocado toast.
Yeah, same. The first I heard of it was them saying that's why I can't afford a house. It's because I eat too much of it.
You can make it yourself. Just get some avocado, mash it up, salt and pepper, put it on toast.
I bought a house
an egg.
instead.
But think about how many avocado toasts you could buy.
I just like to ask you a very quick question, Panda. How many avocado trees do you think grow in Ireland?
You know, I've never been to Ireland, so I have no idea. The
Okay.
answer is
What
probably
region-
one.
But it's like, what region of the world has avocados as a natural resource?
Mexico.
So where am I getting it has to be imported. It's you can make your own, just get some avocados. Ah yes, from the avocado trees that
Maybe
grow in
if you
different
guys
countries.
maybe you guys didn't spend so much time like brewing Guinness and catching leprechauns, then you could have time for avocado toast and making avocado orchards.
There's
Avocado
frozen
Guinness.
avocados.
Speaking of imports, fruit is incredibly expensive here.
Oof.
Well, you also live on a very densely populated island.
Yes, I do.
Try Soylent Green. I hear it's good.
Soylent Green. Yeah.
I'd like to try Soylent.
There's a marketing weirdness. You go, Soylent Green, it's made out of people. What are we going to call our new product? Well, let's call it Soylent because no one's going to make that connection that it's people. Really?
Wait, what?
Branding. We're talking about Soylent. Are we talking about Insure? No.
Panda, you don't know about Soylent Green?
No, I don't.
Oh, wow.
Spoilers.
Spoilers for Soylent Green.
Spoilers. Yeah.
When was Soylent Green? When was Soylent Green produced?
I've heard of it. I
Like
just
the
don't know
60s or 70s, I think.
the
Okay, so
drama.
there's this old movie, and I hear it's not actually very good, but like there's a point in the movie where everyone's eating Soylent Green. Spoilers for Soylent Green, everybody.
Oh, so it's an
and-
actual movie called Soylent
Yeah, it's real.
Green?
It's based on a 60s novel by Harry Harrison.
I did not know.
Okay.
Harry Harrison?
Wow.
Wow.
What a
I'm
name.
prolific.
wrote the Harry Harrison, the Stainless Steel Rat books as well.
Oh, I read one of those.
I've
I
definitely
love-
heard of that.
I loved those when I was a kid, and they were I had like I think all of them, and I got to meet him once very very briefly, and I was so thankful because I got to thank him and went, these books were brilliant when I was growing. I absolutely loved them, and thank you so much for writing them. It was so nice. But again, like Panda was saying earlier, about going back to a book that you've read, times change, cultures change, things move on, and now when we read certain books written in different time periods and different cultures with a different cultural awareness, we can see the reflection of cultural values that we no longer hold true. And I think this goes to a point, and I don't mean to sound very, very critical, but if you take our current cultural paradigm and you look at a text and go, this book is bad because it doesn't do this thing, and you go, but it was written 60 years ago. think of our current cultural paradigm. Now think 60 years into the future. Can you pick from this moment in time the aspect of our culture that we think is perfectly fine, that in 60 years' time, people like us are going to look back and go, I'm not going to read that book because that thing is terrible. How could these people not have known that? That was really obvious that that was wrong.
Also, I think it's important to remember how fast our zeitgeist has changed recently. Like, it's really been accelerating quite quickly. Like, people in the 1300s and people in the 1400s didn't really have very different views of, like, fundamental views of the world. But if you look at a great example is gay rights. Like 20 years ago, that wasn't really even a thing. Like, a lot of people were very anti-gay rights. And now it's almost a consensus in the West that, yes, it is valid to be homosexual.
And people pretend like they supported it the whole time.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was only just over 100 years ago that Oscar Wilde was sentenced to hard labor, basically because he was gay.
Oh, yeah. Less than that for Alan Turing.
And you go, but this isn't going back into days of yore. This is, still relatively recent. That
We're
people
still alive.
were sentenced to prison for being gay, and then it was it was kind of decriminalized for a while. But even in the 60s and the 70s, you still had prosecutions for these things. We still prosecute aspects of offenses that deal with homosexuality, where if it was a heterosexual couple, they'd just get off with a warning. Say, being nude in public or doing some nefarious deed, you and your loved one out in a car on make-out point. And if it's a heterosexual couple, you crazy kids, get back to your house. Gay couple, right, that's it, that's wrong. Come down here. You were exposing yourselves in public. There's still a bias that runs through a lot of different societies, including our own. It takes time for these things to normalize. It takes time for these things to go, you know what, we're all humans. Everything should be treated equally across the whole of the human experience. But assuming that past cultures should have done that, you go, really? That I always find a bit strange.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Fun fact, I think Alan Turing was pardoned for his crime of homosexuality about, 10 years ago.
Yeah,
Wow.
It wasn't so long ago that he got his posthumous pardon.
Wow.
I'm sure that made him happy. This has been great. I was wondering if we can move on to Malazan stuff.
Yeah.
So you could shoot me down if you don't like the idea, but I was thinking maybe we could talk about our favorite characters or favorite moments in these first 5 books.
And then you can tell
that
us why those
hair.
are wrong.
What?
We're not recording
You should
the
let your
video.
hair. You should let your hair down in your videos. It's beautiful.
Rockstar
Wow.
AP Canavan.
Okay, I have a question for AP, and I'm sorry if you get this a lot. Has anybody ever told you your resemblance to Brad Pitt?
For those of you who can't see the video feed, I just was staring at the camera and thinking,
I
going,
can
what?
see it. He does.
Does he not?
Yeah,
I can
he
see
does.
it, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Like age 10 years or so.
No, from what?
That is so me. He's older than me. And, AP's like, he's like,
okay.
Brad
Hold
Pitt's dad.
on. I've only seen Brad Pitt in movies where he was super young. So I haven't really looked at him in 20 years.
And he's rich and a movie star. So have you seen Paul Rudd? The dude's 53 and he looks like he's in his 20s.
Yep. Acts like it
He
too.
has a baby face, but I'm sorry. When I saw your profile picture on YouTube the first time, I had to do a double take. I was like, hold on a second.
Now that
Why
you're
does
saying
Brad
that,
Pitt have
he
a
looks
channel?
just like that profile picture's right on.
Now, Panda, don't take this the wrong way. When was the last time you got the prescription of your glasses checked?
And there are 4 of us here saying that you look like Brad Pitt. So
I got new glasses this year, so there you go.
What resolution are your monitors set to?
If we didn't hear the Irish accent, yeah.
You could be Brad Pitt's brother.
I would say brother, yeah.
What was it? The film with Brad Pitt and Harrison Ford, was it The Devil's Own, where Brad Pitt attempts an Irish accent? Go and try and find a clip of that.
Oh.
Is it as good
I've
as his
only-
Italian accent?
You know what? I have enormous respect for actors who attempt these things, who do research. And quite often, I think actors are not given the amount of time with a speech coach who can really teach them how to do an accent. They're just do it, and they end up doing a caricature and it falls in and out, and they've never been taught how to do it properly. And it's not the actor's fault. They are doing the best they can with the resources they've been given. But quite often when I hear Irish accents in films, a little part of my soul dies.
Oh, no.
This is why Saoirse Ronan needs to be cast in more things. Wait, is she Scottish? I'm sorry,
No.
she's Scottish.
Cillian Murphy.
Cillian Murphy. Oh yeah, her too.
No, Saoirse Ronan isn't Scottish. She's Irish.
Okay, awesome. Good. I like Brad Pitt's accents in
Maybe.
Snatch, especially. That was
Have
something
we
else.
offended your Irishness?
Cultural heritage.
So
No, it's one of those weird ones. There are because there are quite distinct accents in this part of the world. And some of them are very, very distinct. And obviously, when you live here, they are radically different. But again, when you're outside a culture, when you're outside of these things, you tend to hear more of the similarities between those than understanding the distinctions. It's the same thing that we have when we perceive cultures. From outside a culture, you perceive it as a sort of homogenous group. But when you're in a culture, you see it as a very heterogeneous group. That it's made up of all of these different factions. And you'll see those factions as homogenous. And then if you go into that faction, again, you'll split it apart further and you'll see it as heterogeneous. And it's weird that it applies in so many different situations. And this goes to that point that I think we talked before we started this, talking about trying to understand things from a different point of view and how important that is to Malazan. See, segue back to the topic
There we
we're meant to
go.
be on.
Yeah,
I'm a professional.
Since we're doing callbacks, I believe earlier AP said that inclusion is not endorsement. Do you think that's why Steve included you in one of his short stories?
Steve has a character that's actually in two of his novellas, not one.
Sorry. So
Um,
he really, really doesn't endorse you then.
Yeah, definitely. Stephen Erickson does not endorse Apto Canavalian.
But we know
Sorry,
Cam does.
I had to. I've been sitting on that since we talked about that.
So
Cam has
does.
AP in the acknowledgments of at least one of his books. I saw that and I was like, hey, I know that guy.
That's how Philip found him.
Actually, that's one of my questions, which is like, I'm sorry, I am a pleb here. I probably watched the fewest number of your videos.
That's okay. I won't talk to you anymore then.
Oh, okay, there we go. Well, that'll be a short interview. Goodbye. How did you become a beta reader for Erickson? And like, what was the first book that you got started with?
So very, very quickly, I'm not the only one who advance reads for Erickson. He has other people. But Erickson and I attended an academic conference in Florida at the same time. And there's a whole... Do you want the whole story, or will I just do the very quick synopsis?
Synopsis.
Okay, synopsis. So we were at an academic conference, bumped into Erickson, we got to talking. I was making academic arguments about genre fantasy and all of this sort of stuff, and he was interested in it. We got to talking, we were hanging out. We met up, with a couple of emails during the year. We met up again at the conference, had more talks. And by this stage, I'd read some of his work. And I was talking to him about it, and I was really interested in it. And I was having these discussions with him, and he was, oh, well, that's actually quite good because I'm writing this book at the minute. And when I was back in the UK, he emailed me, and it was when he was writing Toll the Hounds. And we had a discussion about some of the stuff that he'd asked my opinion on these particular bits of it. And I sent him feedback on it. Just, this is what I've just read it. Here's what I think. And then we had some more email conversations, and he invited me down to visit him and his wife, because they were in England and I was in England, come down for the weekend. We'll hang out and we'll talk. And that was the start of us basically becoming friends, but also him saying, right, here's the text. Go through it, read it, and tell me what you think. And because of my training and because I would do freelance editing work and this sort of thing, he liked the feedback that I gave him. It wasn't just, oh, I like this bit. It was, I'm really enjoying this because, and then an explanation. It was, this is strange because you're doing this thing and this thing, but suddenly here it doesn't seem to fit. And then about like 5 pages later, I see why you did that thing there. And I've now realized it, but this is the moment where I realized it. So when he was reading through my notes, he could track exactly how I was responding to things to see whether or not I should be responding earlier and go, AP wasn't responding until this point. I wanted him to respond 2 pages before that or a chapter before that. So it gave him an insight, I think, into how at least one reader was responding to his work. So it was because of Toll the Hounds. That was the first book that I started doing some advanced reading for Ericsson on. And then subsequent to that, I think it's every single book that he has written since that I've read in advance, and sometimes the whole text is sent to me. Sometimes it's chapter by chapter, and I give him feedback. I give him that sort of. That's how it happened.
Nice.
I'm imagining a Gumball and Ormulagan kind of relationship.
He's the mad genius artist, and I'm the complaining, cynical critic.
Ashimon has not
Who
read
is also a
Crackpot
toad, yes.
Trail yet, so
I haven't, no.
we need to. I think since we're out
sorry.
of time, though, we should do the listener questions.
Well, I have a follow-up question to AP. What is it like beta reading for an author that does not take notes? Do you often become the note taker for him?
Well, no. I beta reading, advanced reading, developmental editing, all that sort of stuff that I do. That is entirely separate. I don't work as a PA for any of the authors I work with. Really, what I typically, because I'm a developmental editor, I'm not a copy editor, I'm not a continuity editor. I don't do those things. Ericsson relies on other people. Other authors have different people they rely on for that. I don't go through and check their spelling. I don't go through and check, oh, well, you said that mountain was in the west, and on the map it's on the east. I'm looking at it in terms of narrative, and the authors I work with know that that's what I am doing. If they wanted someone to check those things, they have other people that they use. So, and I know Ericsson has said, I don't take notes. I've seen a lot of the notes and things that he has done over time. I think he's bad at keeping track of them. I found stuff in a box once, and I went, "Oh, what's this?" He said, "I haven't seen that in years. That's really interesting." There's the original sort of character sheets for some of the Hounds of Shadow.
Wow.
You heard it here, listeners. Ericsson is a liar.
All
From
authors
AP
are
Canavan's
liars.
mouth.
All authors are liars. They are very pretty liars who tell us the most amazing, beautiful, wonderful lies.
Yes, they do. Okay,
Break it in.
I'm done with my questions on that.
Okay. So I have a sort of half-formed not bad. Okay, I'm not gonna call it bad because that's poisoning my own well.
It's bad.
on 3 of the characters, and who seem to me, and since this is stylistically the closest book to Hamlet, I'm gonna make a Hamlet comparison. They seem to me to be embodying different aspects of the character Hamlet. What do you think about this?
Right. So, when you've been thinking about something for months and you've come up with a theory, and then you just tell it to someone and haven't warned them in advance that maybe they should have reread Hamlet sometime in the last decade. So the first thing is obviously that the ending of that book is very much reminiscent of the scene in Hamlet, which causes you to immediately think about this, because it is very Shakespearean, but in particular quite like the duel scene at the end of Hamlet. and even the references to the and that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that creates that aspect. So what are the why do you think this is an aspect of Hamlet? What do you associate, or what's the connection you have between and Hamlet?
So, and Hamlet both seem trapped within their own narratives. Hamlet has an inability, well, for most of the narrative, he is completely unable to choose what he's going to do. That's his central conceit. I feel is a character very much like him. He's very perceptive. He sort of sees how things work in the world, much like Hamlet does. But in the end, his choice is taken away from him in a way that Hamlet actually does end up managing to be decisive, perhaps waits too long to make a choice.
Right. So, okay, so on the point of now this is interesting. Hamlet, sees these things and ultimately makes a decision, and we can all say that it didn't work out particularly well. Is a slave. He doesn't have the power that a prince of the realm has. That has been stolen from him. He is a slave. And so to say that he doesn't act in time or he doesn't do these things in time, that's an enforced external position pressed on him by others because of the structure of the society and the fact that he has been enslaved. So there's a fundamental distinction between this idea of choice and perception of choice being within your power, and whether or not structures can inhibit that choice, whether they are seen, unseen, whether they are overt or covert. And that's an interesting way to explore both the similarities and contrasts between Hamlet. But fundamentally, they are radically different characters because of their social position and how the society treats them and their opinions. Is actually, I think, in some ways, a phenomenal character, because despite the fact that at any moment any one of could just have him killed, still manages a modicum of being himself, of having contrary opinions, of being able to be critical and to think these things. He refuses to be beaten down, and that is actually quite distinct in contrast to, say, Hamlet, who has all of the privilege and power associated with being a prince in the realm. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think okay, so let's oversimplify this. It's Hamlet if he's a slave.
Well, can Hamlet still be Hamlet if he's a slave?
Yeah.
See, that's a good question, and we could probably talk more about that.
I was right.
Maybe we should move towards the other characters before I get completely cut off by Hurin, who wants me to shut up. I think is the most similar in that, he agonizes over his decisions for most of the narrative, and at the end he does make a decision, and it ends up costing him pretty dearly. But throughout he tries to make small decisions that he feels are right, which sometimes backfire and sometimes don't. He doesn't pretend to be mad like Hamlet. Instead, he wears all of his feelings on his sleeve and lets everybody know what he's thinking. So in this sense, it seems to me like he's Hamlet without the political savviness.
Okay, so again, let's think about this a slightly different way. How much of this is because he is being like Hamlet, or how much of it is because Hamlet is encapsulating that concept, that part of the human condition about trying to understand your place in the world, trying to understand these things, about having a perception of what is wrong and wanting to fix it and trying to find the best way? Is that core to Hamlet, or is that core to the human condition that Hamlet is an articulation of? And so is like Hamlet, or is another articulation of this same aspect of human preoccupation with, when you are placed in a situation and you see something is wrong, how do you deal with it? How do you negotiate social mores, cultural conventions? Do you question, am I the only one who sees it? So am I right and everyone else is wrong, or am I insane? Is this actually wrong? Am I so convinced that I'm the only one who can see this and everyone else is stupid? These are all self-doubts, and we see self-doubt so much in what Hamlet does, is to be or not to be speech aside. Mm-hmm. But is that because it's like Hamlet, or is it because and Hamlet are both exploring the same thing?
That's probably a better way of putting it, I would think. But given similarities to the play, I think probably the
Hang on a
comparisons.
sec.
Huh?
There is a massive assumption. How many scenes in do you think are similar to Hamlet, with the exception of the scene at the end?
So, in Asherman's defense, Steven Erickson told us that was his attempt to get as close as Malazan was going to get to the archetypal Shakespearean Aristotelian tragedy, and he used Hamlet kind of as an example. So it's an assumption with stuff to back it up. There's some stuff to back it up from the author.
Okay, but listen to what you just said. Erickson said that he was trying to do a tragedy in the style of Aristotle, in the style of Shakespeare. One of the proponents of which, one of the examples of which, is Hamlet. But that's not what Asherman was saying. Asherman was saying, just like Hamlet, it owes all of this to Hamlet. You go, no, hang on a sec.
Perhaps I should make a clarifying statement then. I think that it is a distinct story. I don't think Steve just kind of cribbed some notes when he was watching the play one time. He was like, I'm going to turn this into a Malazan story. I just think that I think there is perhaps value in comparing the two on a critical sense.
Oh yeah, no, and I agree. And I'm having a bit of fun. But and again, but it goes to the point of, is it trying to be Hamlet, or is it trying to reach for the things that Hamlet the play was trying to articulate? That this style of tragedy, this style of internal familial strife that has repercussions in a grander or external sense because of the power of the individuals involved. And that goes all the way back to the Greek tragedies. So those elements, I think, are all there. But when you try to locate it specifically to Hamlet, that's when you get it. Oh, but it's like this, and there is value in that. It helps you isolate elements. But when you formulate your entire argument that way, you're forgetting of the grander aspect of it, which is look at it in the context of a tragedy. Look at it in the context of Greek tragedy. Look at it in the context of a Shakespearean or Elizabethan tragedy. Look at it in the context of, say, Jacobean tragedy. How those forms are all slightly different, but they are concerned with many of the same things. Because you could look at, say, The Duchess of Malfi by Webster and make a very similar comparison and go, oh, this is just like Jacobean tragedy, The Duchess of Malfi. And everyone would go, what? Because not everyone knows Jacobean tragedy, not everyone knows The Duchess of Malfi, whereas a lot of people know what Hamlet is.
Fair points.
Yeah, I think I'm done with this in that case.
What was that, Hurin?
It says that you're saying Ash is wrong.
Well, in many more words, yes.
We could have just cut out all of that when I said it was bad at the beginning.
Yeah, see?
But actually, they are a really good point. It's a great way of focusing your attention on something to try and pick up on these details. I think this is brilliant. Trying to compare modern fantasy writing to classical literature as we understand it in the English canon. And it shows the value of fantasy as a literary form. Because we talked earlier about, the tensions between commercial or artistic. And you go, here is something that is in what is commonly perceived as a commercial genre. But there are strong artistic literary elements to these books. And by making that comparison, by thinking about those things, this is precisely how we approach literature. It's thinking about them. And then once you've isolated those elements, or you've isolated elements that are the same, that are different, then you take a step back and you compare and contrast it to, say, other examples of that type to see, is it the play Hamlet that is being evoked, or is it a grander scheme of tragedies? Is it Elizabethan tragedy or the earlier tragedies? And you test your theory against other things instead of constantly looking at just your theory and trying to find support for your theory. Test it against a broader background to see maybe are there other articulations of it, and it's actually going to a broader point rather than a very specific text-specific point. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, and I think in a similar vein, taking the commodification versus artistic vision to its logical extreme. Steve said he wrote Malazan as a plea for tragedy. Well, he could have just written a dissertation philosophically about why he thinks that compassion is important, and we should examine other people's viewpoints and cultural context and yada yada yada. But nobody would have read that because it'd probably be very boring. So you can wrap it in a fantasy story and use the lovely things we call metaphors and lure people in, as it were, with humor and battle sequences that are fun to read, and actually get your point across.
I have
But
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, but there's also a difference in that. If you're writing a dissertation arguing for something, if you're writing an argument for something, that's a very different style of writing. But if you write it in a novel, and it's not necessarily, I am trying to persuade you of this one point. It's it is an articulation of it. It's like, do you find this interesting? Because the genre seems to have turned its back on tragedy as a form for fantasy, and it's, can I write a fantasy that is a tragedy that still fulfills what people actually enjoy about the genre? Because there's an assumption being made that people don't enjoy tragedies. And so it's not arguing you should read tragedies. It's more, I'm going to put this out there and let you come to your own decision. So there's a lot of, I think, common elements in Erikson's writing is articulations of different aspects of different positions. And the freedom then is given to the reader. He trusts the reader to read it and to make up their own mind, regardless of what he believes. Whereas quite often, from an essay point of view or a thesis point of view, you argue for a position or you're arguing against a position. Erikson very much goes, here are aspects of this argument. What do you think? And he's asking the question. It's an invitation to the reader to engage, not a, pay attention, here's what I'm going to tell you.
Yeah, that's a very good distinction. And do you think that he could have done it in fewer words? Is the series too long?
Panda asks, hopefully.
Okay. Let's look at this from a different perspective. Why is fewer words better? If I'm going to go out and spend, say, $20 on a brand new book, and that book is 150 pages long, I get X number of hours out of reading it. I spent $20 on a book that's 1,200 pages long. I get significantly more hours enjoyment out of that book. So why should I want my books to be shorter and to the point and just get on with it?
This is like word for word the response I made when people in our Discord were like trying to get me to read shorter stuff and asking why I have such trouble picking up shorter stuff. This is like exactly what I said. Almost.
Why use big word when small word do trick?
But there's one aspect of it. There's an economic aspect to it that you go, yeah, I get hours and hours and hours of enjoyment out of it. Now, here's another thing. Why is it that we, in this current cultural milieu, value just getting to the point very quickly?
I think it's also a personality thing, not necessarily a cultural thing.
Because you've had access to cell phones for too long.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, I mean, obviously, a lot of YouTube channels and a lot of different YouTube videos, if you're going to be really, really good at it, shorts have to be under a minute. If you look at your viewing time on how long people view, under 10 minutes is probably the sweet spot that people will pay attention. They usually turn off after 10 minutes is kind of the cutoff. They turn off. They might come back later. And if I was going to do it, to try and do it as quickly as possible, I could go and do a video going, here are the things that you need to know about narrative. There's this, 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 this. I could run through it really, really quickly. And you go, right. And then someone will ask a question. I don't follow that. You go, okay. So I'll do a follow-up video of a further 10 minutes going into those points. And they go, I'm still not following that out. You go, okay, so I'll do another video. Here's some more examples. Or I could just cut to the chase, do a video that is an hour long, and people who get the point and that's all that they needed can tap out. People who want a bit more explanation can watch for longer. It leaves it up to the individual to decide what it is that they want from it. But if I made the decision and I'm just going to run through, I'm going to give you the bullet points, and if you don't get it, tough, go away. That cutting to the chase and summarizing everything is assuming that everyone is time poor, that no one wants to enjoy even the discussion and the nuance to it. And this is a big thing. Yes, you can do things in a lot fewer words, but the more words that you cut away, the less nuance you have, the less complexity that you can explore. And if you boil things down, yes, you'll get to the essential argument or the essential point, but you have lost all of that nuance. You'll have lost all of the, well, but that might be the general rule, but here's an exception. And the exception is interesting because it reveals this aspect or this bias or this assumption we make in the general rule. And that's, I think there is value to that. And taking your time to explore something allows you to go in slightly deeper, understand it better. And that's my own personal preference. It's what I like. It's why I produce videos the way that I do. It's why certain authors like doing these things. But if you just want the plot synopsis of a book, go and read the Spark Notes and, save yourself multiple hours because you can skim read the Spark Notes and go, oh, well, I know what happened. But that's not the point of literature. The point of literature is not, I know what happened in the end. The point of literature is using language to explore interesting stories that reveal things about the human condition, that explore aspects of our society or other societies of other time periods, about calling into question assumptions and biases and all these things that we make unthinkingly and framing them in a way that makes us think again. That's one of the beauties of literature.
Well,
so sure, we can make bullet point lists of things and skip through them very, very quickly, but it in some respects defeats the purpose of what it can achieve.
And I think so. I mean, I haven't read The Crippled God, right? I haven't got to the end of the series. I haven't got to those like huge moments where it can like reverberate backwards through the entire series and kind of help you reinterpret the entire thing. So I don't know where it's all going yet, though AP did spoil a big part of it for me one time.
Thank you for that.
But which I can't say right now because Panda's on the call. But
I am really sorry. I am so sorry.
I'm not mad, but one of the things we wanted to make sure we did was give you some ribbing for that. So I just threw that in there. But at least I can think of it in terms of Dead House Gates, Memories of Ice, House of Chains. Real quickly, I'll try to really quickly make an argument for an expansive, nuanced approach. Dead House Gates, those big moments with those huge payoffs, or in the case of thing, very frustrating for some people, especially the first time, that frustration or that release or that sadness, it just doesn't land. So I don't know if I mean, like I said, I can't answer. Is the point of book 10, does it need to be 10 books to get to that point? I can't answer that. But at least for the first like few books, I can see like why it needed to be as long as it was, even though it might have felt long at some points, even to me. Like reading through The Chain of Dogs the first time, of course, I hated the book. So that does obviously color, the way you're reading it. It felt long as hell. and I did not like how long it felt. But like looking back on it, the ending would not have mattered if it wasn't the way it was,
I think there's also something to be said about making your text more accessible if that's what you would want. And part of it is that, if I could read something that is shorter, that gives the same kind of impact, right, than what Erickson has written, then I would choose that. Not to say that, I don't like Erickson's writing. It's just time is precious and attention span is limited. And also, when you're starting out on this Malazan journey, not knowing, I mean, obviously hindsight is 2020, but not knowing like how well the payoff will be when you're investing hours and hours, right, following along. It's daunting. Yeah, it's very daunting.
Yeah, and that is absolutely, we all have different books that we enjoy. We all have different reasons even for reading. And think of it, let's take this as a point. If all authors wrote as concisely as absolutely possible to get across the absolute bare minimum in the most accessible language possible for every single story, do you think we would still have the same diversity of stories? do you think that we would still have the same diversity of different authors telling us different things and exploring different things? The great aspect of the field as it is now, we have so many authors telling stories in so many different ways that no one is saying you have to enjoy this, but there are people who will. And there are other authors that Panda, you may love those authors, and I'll look at, and I would read the book and go, I absolutely detest this book. And it's not because it is a bad book or that you have bad taste or I have bad taste. It's that we have personal preferences about the style that we like or what it is that we want to investigate. And in your point, and you made an excellent point, and I don't disagree with your position, but you said if something was shorter that had the same impact, how can you guarantee that it would have the same impact? Because if you think of what Yasna said, of the chain of dogs. That chain of dogs, you're on it and you feel, you start with and everything is depressing and you see them get, but it's not that you see them do that. You start to feel it. You're on that journey with them. And that emotional release at the end, all of those feelings, all of those emotions, would doing it in fewer words have created the same impact? Or would it be similar, but not as impactful?
That's a fair point. Yeah. And I do think it's kind of ironic that Erickson, a short story writer, has written one of the longest series ever.
It's the world's longest short story. It's a 3.2 million word short story.
But, that's why... but the fact that he writes it like short stories, he doesn't waste any of these words. Compare it to other longer fantasy series where I feel like an entire book might have been wasted words. Wheel of Time. Which by the way, I love Wheel of Time. But book 10, I felt ripped off the minute I put it down. It was just nothing for a whole book. So that short story style kind of condenses everything and pares it all down to like just what needs to be there, and it just happens to be 3 million words long.
to give you a different perspective on this, The God Is Not Willing is a much shorter novel. It has, and I'm not going to spoil anything because I know not everyone has read it, but it's a much shorter novel. It's much more focused. There are fewer moving parts to it. Some of the language I think is more straightforward, and therefore a lot of people would term more accessible. And I know that a lot of people really appreciated that. And there are at least a certain percentage of people have gone, it's not a proper Malazan book because the thing I loved about Malazan was it was long and it was big, and this is too, he's sold out, he's become commercial. And you cannot please all readers because we all have different things that we love. And that's great because it supports a diverse ecosystem of storytelling. And that's wonderful and should be celebrated. So I understand your point. Sometimes you go, oh, could you not just have gotten to the point sooner? But take it, and my example of like in essays or even in videos, some people will get what you're talking about and understand what you're talking about very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. But other people won't. And do you just go, well, I'll just write for that little tiny minority who are just going to get what I'm doing? Do you write for a greater number of people and go, well, this isn't going to be as compact. I'm going to have to expand some things. I'm going to explore things in a different way. I'm going to give them more examples. And the first group of people go, oh, you could have cut all of those things out and it would have been fine. And other people are going, no, but that was exactly the thing that I needed. And this is the great thing about discussing literature, when you have multiple perspectives, where you guys are all reading the same book and someone says, oh, I hated that storyline. That was completely unnecessary. Why did Erickson include it? And then one of the others of you will say, but I really liked that storyline. That was the thing that I really enjoyed. I loved those characters. That gave me the insight into the other things that were going on.
So what you're saying is you recently listened to our House of Chains coverage.
I did say I do listen to your podcast. I just didn't make notes.
I do think that there is one thing that we all agree maybe if not could be cut, but could be pared down is like in Dead House Gates.
Yeah.
I still can't figure that one out.
Okay,
I can't either.
so why, when you think of on the Batmans of Art, why didn't? Oh, was
So it's
that
funny that you
Kalam's
say this
journey?
because I didn't catch that, and I didn't know that there was
I didn't
until
either.
you just said it.
Yeah.
So that does actually give a good argument for
We've been
including
told.
the ship thing in the. I just thought that was an idiot.
I still think it was boring, but yeah, that's neither here or there.
But not every thread is going to land for every reader, and not
Yeah.
and no author can do that, because even the most popular authors in the world, there'll be sections that you go, oh, I just didn't like that, or it didn't land for me, and maybe I'm not the one that it worked for.
Yeah.
And again, that is it's perfectly valid. It's absolutely fine. This is the joy of reading. But we all agreed that should have been cut. And I've just gone, well, no, here's the reason why it shouldn't have been cut.
I'll correct your statement. I never said it should be cut. I said maybe trimmed down.
So if we go back to what's the English word? Conciseness.
Brevity.
Doesn't that just mean brevity, conciseness? In Christian or
Concision.
Yasna brought up Jordan, right? So people love Jordan. He's incredibly popular, and I like Jordan as well. But you can't say that he's concise. And the same thing for Brandon Sanderson, right? So he's like absolutely the most popular author right now. But he repeats himself over and over and over and over again, to the point where I like his stuff a lot, but it kind of drives me crazy. And yet, like, the same people who like this stuff are criticizing Stephen for, I don't know, being too verbose, when I think it's the opposite.
Right. Well, again, it's a difficult thing, because people will like what they like. And quite often we look at, say, someone like Sanderson. And I recently did a video talking about, it was the prologue of the recent Stormlight Archive book, and how he uses his style to repeat a lot of the same information in multiple ways, but it's in very clear language. It's very accessible, low level. You don't need a complex vocabulary to get it. It's very direct. It's talking directly almost to the reader at a lot of different points in it. It's not closely tied to a point of view, because we get a lot of narratorial inserts that clearly the character is not thinking about, but it's the author wants you to have this information. So because of that, it is exceptionally clear. And therefore, you can skim along very, very quickly. It's all there on the top, on the surface. So you can plow through that at a huge speed, at a great speed, because you know you're going to get it. And if you don't get it the first time, the second time, the third time, you know that Sanderson's going to give you it the sixth time, where the important parts of that are going to be communicated to you. So you can move through it very, very quickly. So it feels very quick and easy. And when you look at Erikson's writing, and Erikson's writing is, people describe it as dense. And you go, well, no, it's intricate, it's complicated, it is using words to do multiple things. But that requires slowing down, because you have to think about it. You have to engage with the actual language. It's not just about telling you a story. It's about exploring the story, the language, the characters, and picking up on nuance and subtext. And that slows you down. So it feels longer, because you're thinking about it more. With Sanderson, you don't need to think. You just skim through it very quickly. With Erikson, you need to think, so it slows everything down. So which feels longer?
Mm-hmm.
Rhythm of War felt like it went on forever for me.
I loved Rhythm of War. That was actually probably my favorite in the series.
But again, it goes to the different styles that we enjoy. It goes to what we're trying to get out. If I'm reading a book and I just want the story, if I just want the story elements, if I want cool characters doing cool things and I don't want to think about it, there are authors that I can read that do that. But if I want a story where I want to be deeply engaged and I want to think about things and I want it to promote complex thought that require me to sit down and go, Let me think about that. Let me engage with it. Do I agree with this? Do I disagree with it? Why don't I agree with it?
Mm-hmm.
That is a much longer process. And for me, a highly enjoyable process, because literature is not just telling someone a story.
Right.
That's one aspect of literature. It's an important aspect. It's part and parcel of all of our cultural heritage. We've always told stories. But the reason we have lots of different types of stories is because sometimes we use stories to teach lessons. Sometimes we use stories that are just entertainment, and that is not a bad thing. Sometimes we use stories to explore difficult concepts. Sometimes we use stories to try and experience different emotions. All of these things are different aspects of narrative and storytelling. And to insist that all stories should be the same is either, well, potentially extraordinarily arrogant, that you think that what you think about this is how stories should be the same for everyone, and it denies everyone their own personal preference.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody here is saying that all stories should be the same. And I do think that, at least for me, part of it is it's kind of like a a pro and a con that the main series is finished, because the experience of reading it is a bit different. Like when you don't know when that series is going to end, right? There's more of an anticipation and exploration kind of lens put on to what you're reading. When I know that there is an end to a series, I'm like, okay, I want to know how it's going to end. Like, what is that payoff? And part of it is also the build up, whether from the community or from whatever people in passing have said, like, it lands, like the payoff is there. And so it's like a different kind of anticipation, a different lens.
And there's like a dual-edged sword to this, in some ways. Like when I was reading, I was getting to the end. I'm like, well, this looks pretty bad for the, but I'm sure he wouldn't, and he did. And there's more books to go. So
yeah.
But and again, like, is an author meant to, like, how do you write a story? Think about it from an author's perspective. How do you write a story that you go, right, I want everyone to have the same exploration thing, and I want them to wonder where it's all going, but I can't tell them that I have thought of the ending and I know where the ending is going and publish the ending, because that's going to ruin that experience for them. And then you have Patrick Rothfuss and George R.R. Martin, who, people are going, give us the ending. What is it that you want? Do you want to know that there is an ending and it's there and you're going to get to it eventually? Or do you not want to know? Pick one, because they're mutually exclusive ideas.
They are. No, I think
no matter what an author does, they are damned for it.
it's not I'm criticizing like the author or anything. It's more of and this is why I feel the way I do.
And again, like we can have differences of opinion. It doesn't invalidate your response, and it's very important. I try to emphasize that, because discussions about these are the things clearly I enjoy. But you're right. If you know it is going to conclude, it can shape your reading. But knowing that it was ending, does that change like what was happening in Memories of Ice? There's all of these other books.
I mean, it goes back to your point about the reader being the dynamic point in the triangle. Yeah.
Yeah, and like something like an ongoing series, like say the Dresden Files. We all assume, and Butcher has said many times, that he knows where it is going. He knows that there's an end to it. But we're following along. And that's a different reading experience to knowing that, all of the books are published and I'm just working through them. But you're still reading through them, seeing how it's being explored.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can't cater to all things. You can't cater to the reader right in the moment, because, authors aren't just creating things just for us.
Right.
They wrote the book, they put it out there. Someone, I think, complained on Reddit that it was on Erickson's Facebook. Oh, why are people messing around? I'll make it slightly more polite. Why are people messing around? I want to listen to the audiobook and they're messing around over my, the authors don't control what publishers and the contracts about distribution networks. Authors have no control over that. That's publishers. It has nothing to do with the author. The author wrote the book,
Right.
sent it to the publisher and went, here you go. I've fulfilled my contract. Here's the book. What a publisher does with it is outside the author's control. And yet authors seem to come into the target of all of these things. They're in the crosshairs for this, as if they're sitting there going, oh, I'm doing this because I want to make millions. And you're like, authors don't make, very few authors make huge amounts of money. Very few of them. They are the exception, not the rule. And even within fantasy, and Brandon Sanderson is one of the biggest sort of fantasy authors, but in comparison to other genres, he is not selling as much as a lot of other authors who are in
historical romance,
romance in general,
or mystery and thrillers.
Mystery, thrillers, YA. A lot of these authors sell huge numbers of books more than fantasy authors. Fantasy is actually niche. It's a small genre, but because we are in it, we see all of these things and we universalize it. But if you're standing outside the genre and looking in, you go, yeah, but you're just a small genre, and go away. And again, it's that idea about perspective and being able to take a step out. Mark Lawrence had a brilliant infographic he did about book sales, and like J.K. Rowling being this powerhouse selling all of this stuff. And then in comparison, all of the other authors, like way down the list. And you go, but these are popular authors. These are authors we know. They're books that we love. They're books that we respect. And we look at this and we suddenly realize they're not as popular as we think because it's within the genre. And that genre is within other genres and a big literary landscape.
And we're inside that culture, so we just we understand this stuff.
It's the same argument people have about, oh, Malazan should be anime. Really?
I think Malazan anime should be excellent.
No.
And for people who like anime, it would be awesome. But how popular is anime for the mainstream sort of audience in the Western sphere, which is how a lot of these production companies are thinking in terms of their marketing? If anime was the answer to everything, we wouldn't have live action films all the time. We have live action films because they appeal.
My favorite adaptational medium for Malazan would be stage plays.
Oh yeah, because that doesn't suffer from any practical limiting factors.
Yeah, no, not at all. And it's
stage.
wildly popular, and everyone wants to go see plays.
I want to find a kabuki.
But a friend of mine once wrote a stage adaptation of Crackpot Trail for just for fun.
Wow.
I would watch that.
Same. Yeah.
All right. So we do have a couple of listener questions. So I think now would be the time to head over to those. Cannon Fodder, who is an awesome supporter of us, he asks, question for Professor Fireballs. What are his thoughts about the importance of timeline accuracy to the effectiveness of the narrative? Does a focus on proper timeline accuracy mean a better narrative?
It depends on the narrative. If you're writing, let's take an example, say historical fiction, and you're writing historical fiction about the life of Julius Caesar, and you happen to be an expert in Caesar's life. You've studied Roman history, and so you read the historical fiction about Caesar's life, and you go, but that doesn't happen there. He didn't meet that character until much later on, and he actually met a different part. When we get narrative is a poetic, dramatic, different form. It's not reality. It's in some respects simplified. And so you have a conflation of narrative events. And so even in historical fiction, if they were trying to be truly accurate in terms of the timeline, that might reduce the dramatic impact of certain events. Whereas if you shuffle things around in a timeline, you can create a better narrative impact. You can create more dramatic tension. You can create a greater emotional or intellectual response to something. Timeline is it's an important element of, particularly of chronological storytelling, or even when it's asynchronous and achronological, where you're mixing things around. But it's not the defining characteristic, and it depends on the story that you're telling. If you have absolute fidelity to timeline, you're going to potentially, depending on the narrative, depending on the story, you can reduce emotional impact. You can introduce a lot more characters than, and readers might say, but why did you introduce all? They were only in one scene. Why didn't you just conflate that? Why did you have that scene? You go, but that's the scene that happened then and there in that moment. No, I understand the point, because the chronology of Malazan is famously the refrain, the timeline doesn't matter. It does matter, but not in terms of absolute fidelity. There is a flow to it. Is it absolutely faithful to a sequence of dates and events? Think of when you're watching a World War II film, and quite often you go, but why did they have that thing happen there? That unit wasn't there until 3 weeks later.
Sure.
And the reason they do that is it makes for more dramatic storytelling. There's always going to be tension and compromise between faithfulness to the sequence of events and telling what the author believes is the most compelling story.
In representation of like the, I guess, the spirit and the like nature of what happened, not necessarily getting every single detail down.
And Panda just proves that you can use far fewer words and be far more concise to get across the point far more accurately and importantly. So thank you very much for the Panda.
And this kind of discussion also brings to mind the resource allocation that authors have to do, because they can't do everything perfectly, right? They have to choose what they want to focus on in narratives and choose what in their writing style they want to focus on and, quote, be good at. And timelines, especially for grand sweeping epics like Malazan, are really complicated to maintain. I think a great example of this is in the Song of Ice and Fire, George R. R. Martin's series. He ran into, at about the 4 or 5 book mark, what he called the Milanese knot, which was in many respects a timeline issue that he needed to figure out how to resolve. And it took him a famously long time to figure that out, and it's not even resolved. That's a large part of why Winds of Winter is taking so long, right? So yeah, but it's just there's trade-off.
But there are always going to be there's always a trade-off. There's always compromise that has to be made, and even then, authors again are human beings. Like they're not infallible. They can make mistakes, and they can write themselves in knots and back themselves into a corner, going, "Oh, that mistake I made 3 books ago. And now when I'm doing this, I should have done that thing." But you can't go back in time and change the book, so you have to deal with it as it is. They're not George
let me introduce
Lucas.
You to the Star Wars sequel trilogy.
Just do
Somehow
a reboot.
Palpatine has returned.
But actually, there is like a very visceral example in my mind where it's like when you're telling somebody a story from your past, right? And you're like, oh, was it like 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 1992, 2000? Like, nobody cares. The person hearing the story doesn't care the exact date or exact duration. They want to know the point of the story. They want to know what happened.
And that is, again, another brilliant, concise point that says that really, AP, you shouldn't ramble quite so much. And Panda, you're exactly right. The number of times you go, oh, and so then they came in. Oh no, wait, I forgot to tell you. So and so was also there, but okay, so 2 weeks before that, and you go, just tell me, the story, because quite often, and the thing is, for some people, this will be really, really important because it's how their brain works. They want to be able to line everything up. And in narrative theory, you have story, which is the chronological sequence of events, and you have plot, which is the narrative events as narrated to you in the article in front of you. And you go, well, so there are 2 different words. They have slightly different meanings. And there are two different ways at looking at the narrative, because the narrative is obviously a sequence of narrative events, but plot is how they are narrated to you, and story is if you resequence everything chronologically. And some stories work really well chronologically because you build that in, and the chronology is actually very, very important. Think of particularly in police procedurals and murder mysteries, where it's the slow build-up of accumulating these clues over time. Now, if you get the timeline wrong in that, you go, but hang on, they knew about that weeks before this thing, so why was this confusing them?
Right.
Suddenly it can break apart and you lose faith in the narrative. But when you're telling a story that is doing something different, that isn't reliant on timeline continuity as the absolute most important thing, then you can see why you go, well, in the grand scheme of things, is this really important? And the
Right.
author might go, no, it's not. It's generally in the right area. It's generally sort of working for this. That's good enough.
I think the point where it does kind of matter for Erickson's writing is because he does have so many different like clues, and he isn't telling you straightforward like what's happening. So the reader does have to put things together, and sometimes the reader needs to rely on, okay, things that have happened before is informing my understanding of what I'm reading currently, right? Personally,
But that's things that have happened before in the narrative. So you're talking about plot here, not about the chronological sequence of narrative events within the diegesis. So just because something happened, say, in Lether 5 years before something else happened, how does that impact on the other things happening and your understanding of the story of, say, of Midnight Ice?
a new book, Midnight Ice.
Memories of Ice. How does knowing the Midnight Tide stuff change your reading of Memories of Ice when they're about separate events?
I misspoke a little bit. It's not necessarily like the events that happened before, but like what you as a reader read before, right? So if things are happening in parallel, but it's like you're reading one book about this one particular timeline, another book about a parallel timeline, and trying to match what was happening to get the grander context of the world.
Yeah, and again, very valid way of reading, very important to bear these things in mind. And like Eric, I don't know how many times Erickson has said, yeah, I messed up. And then what, do I try and fix it? Do I try and retcon things? Do I try and put in an explanation? Or do I just go, you know what? At the end of the day, is it important for the main aspects of the story that I'm telling? And like, one of the get out clauses that Erickson built into the narrative is obviously you have a lot of subjective narration.
Yep.
You have a lot of postmodern deconstructive elements being worked in. And people go, oh yeah, but that's just a get out clause. And you go, yes, and George R.R. Martin, doing various things. Would you prefer for Erickson just to wait? Or in Robert Jordan, the Tavern, are you telling me that's not a really convenient narrative excuse for all of these things happening to just these these
I have
singular
no
people?
idea what that is.
Have you watched the show yet, Panda?
Nope.
Okay.
Authors build in elements of their narrative to allow them to explore things. You've heard Erickson, and in the books they talk about convergence, and convergence being very important. And when you think about it, you go, oh, well, that's just an artificial thing he put in the narrative. But when you think about it, when you have one power suddenly doing something, another power gets attracted to it. That makes sense to us because, oh, well, if you're going to do that, I'm going to try and stop you. And then other powers looking at it go, well, if they weaken each other, I can sneak in here and I can do something. So it attracts another power. And suddenly you have a convergence of events. In our heads, it actually makes sense. It's just that characters in this world are more aware of this than we are. In Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, they have Tavern, and they because of their very nature, they bend events around them, not necessarily to their will, but they are influencing events because they are that important to the narrative. And you go, okay, these are both elements that are made explicit in a fantasy text to explain away sometimes why convenient things happen. And then the last thing on this point, how many times have you heard an expression similar to truth is stranger than fiction, where really weird, insane, bizarre coincidences happen in the real world. And you go, there's no way. Oh, it did happen. Right.
Yeah.
That sounds, if someone put that in a story, I never would have believed it. It's too weird, but yet that's the kind of thing that actually happens in the real world. And so if an author is going to be including aspects of it, quite frequently they put in an element that is going to explain it to people who would not believe it otherwise. That there's a god in influencing events. There's a mystical property that the characters have. There's a strange thing about the metaphysics of the world. It gets added in because it allows readers that moment to accept that really bizarre coincidences do happen. And we only have to look at our own world to see it.
I agree.
It's not a coincidence, but no one would really believe you if you had a cult starting in your story. And one of the biggest problems they're facing at the start is too many people were castrating themselves. Which is, of course, something that happened in early Christianity.
Yeah.
And I think another sort of defense, something that Malazan does is it's written like a history, and not so much a modern history, but, like in the old style, like something like Herodotus would write. And guess what? Herodotus was not always 100% consistent.
No, you don't say.
Because history it's not just a series of facts that we relate to people. It itself is a story that we tell based on an incomplete puzzle that we've assembled from 1,000 different sources who may or may not be credible.
Mm-hmm.
And which the historian picks from those and picks out what they think are the most important. So it's always going to be weighted by a narrative bias. And little known fact about Herodotus, his first name was clearly Victor, because history is written by the victors.
That was actually pretty good. I have a question. It's not going to be the episode. Since I think you're the only one who's watched the Wheel of Time show, AP, have they explained to Viren?
No.
Okay.
They will at some point. Presumably.
Plot armor.
See people who talk about plot armor, this drives me nuts. Take a story about World War II, because remember, this is written as Malazan's written as a history. So the narrator of the Malazan story that you're reading knows the end of the events. Therefore, they weighted it, and they're going to tell you about, quite often, a lot of the people who are important to those events. It's written retrospectively. Now, think of World War II, and you go, right, I'm going to tell a story about the Normandy beach landings. And you go, and I'm going to follow, in my story, Tommy and Jimmy, and oh, look, they all died on the boat. Well, we never got to the Normandy beach landings.
It's plot armor.
And you go, oh, it's plot armor. That's bad writing. And you go, no, it's bad writing if you go, oh, this hero, and they have all of these weaknesses, and they run through a hail of bullets. And it just so happened, like Discovery, episode 1 of season 4, millions of laser bolts firing at them, and they're just running along through it, and you go, and then they throw in a line. They should have hit us by now. Yes. And calling attention to it is not necessarily a good thing. Oh, now you're going to give us an excuse for it, are you? That excuse doesn't make any sense. This is bad.
Like every Star Wars movie.
Stormtrooper aim. Oh, only Imperial blasters are so accurate. Really? Because from what I've seen, all of us...
Don't get me started on how the Ewoks trivialize the Stormtroopers.
Oh, because that armor can be defeated by a small cuddly teddy bear armed with a stone-tipped spear that doesn't pierce the armor? What do you mean?
Why did they even bother inventing technology? They could have just used bows and arrows and spears the entire time.
Let's move on.
No, hang on a sec. Better question. Why do they even have armor when it doesn't deflect blasters, it doesn't deflect lightsabers, it doesn't deflect stone spears, it doesn't deflect stone arrows that are fired by little tiny bows that are being fired by teddy bears?
Because they're meant to look like Nazis.
Because they look cool. Okay. Moving on to our next listener question by Jingles90. Question for Professor Canavan. I almost called you Caravan. Sorry.
It happens all the time.
What do you think Erikson's perception of the nuclear family and its role in Malazan is? And why does Erikson hate youngest siblings? The last bit is mostly meant as a joke, but it was a parallel that Jingles found interesting in the first 5 books.
Well, for a start, when did the concept of the nuclear family come out? And I'll give you a clue. It's called the nuclear family.
I think that was early 17th century.
But how long have humans lived in social groupings? And when did it become common that you just have the parents and children living in a house together and not 3 generations or 4 generations? Erickson and Esselmont both have anthropological and archaeological training. They're looking at a grand sweep of all of human history, not just the modern paradigm. And when you look at even medieval culture or Renaissance culture, and that's just looking at European, but if you broaden that scope, the idea that it's a parent and children living in a family, that's in terms of human history, very, very recent.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of social groups, tribes, multiple generations living in the same household, even the expression, it takes a village to raise a child. Like, where did that is part and parcel of the human experience over the vastness of how long humans have been running around. And I don't think it's necessarily that Erickson has a problem with the nuclear family.
I agree.
But how much of that do you want to put into a fantasy novel? Oh, all these families, it's just the parents and the kids living in the same house. And you go, but isn't this meant to evoke different cultural practices and different tribal practices and different time periods and all of these different things? You go, why insist on that one minor aspect? And again, inclusion is not the same as endorsement, and non-inclusion is not the same as non-endorsement. But it's a way of exploring different dynamics and cultural groupings, of which the family unit is just one. At least I think. I could be wrong.
No, I think you're. I mean, I agree with you. The nuclear family is a very Western concept, and it's also something that I argue with my parents about, because they are very much like, I want you to be closer and to be all living, in the same, under the same roof. And I'm like, yeah, sorry, I'm too Americanized.
Well, and you want to hold ragers late at night. We know about you.
You found me out.
Yeah, we're so well. But you didn't answer the important part of the question, which is why does Erickson hate youngest siblings?
Do you have youngest siblings?
I do.
I am the youngest sibling.
Same.
Well, then you know why people hate you.
Yeah.
Oh my
this is
God.
true. Yeah.
The youngest
looking back at
sibling.
my whole life and then realizing everything.
No
The
comment.
youngest sibling always gets away with stuff that the older siblings don't. The eldest gets the most discipline, not allowed to do things. They have to live by these really rigid rules. By the time the parents have gotten down to the youngest sibling, if there's multiple siblings, they're like, we have others. If we lose this one, it's not that bad. Go and eat paint and set fire to things. Who cares? Because they can afford to lose you. They have replacements already in place.
Oh my God.
You're like a spare, a backup.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, all of the others have done all of this responsibility. The parents are tired. They've got, you know what? We tried. Raise yourself. We just love you for who you just be you. You beautiful, special little child. Oh, you want your elder brother's toys? He should share with you. Oh, you want to take that thing off your elder brother that he's using? Yeah, you should have that. We love you. We love you more than the others.
Are you?
That's why people hate them.
Are you an older sibling?
What gives you that idea?
Is this why you know me so well?
I
Just describe my
have
life.
older siblings, but I also have a younger sibling.
Yeah.
Evil.
I think it's a universal experience.
Okay, so we did this with Steve when he was on the latest interview with us. We did a little this or that. Are you okay with us posing a bunch of questions to you? And
Yeah, sure.
yeah, how's that
Okay,
different than
so-
what we've already done?
First, I have to ask you: Are you capable of giving 1 or 2 word answers? Because otherwise, this isn't going to work.
Yeah,
Oh.
because it's a 3 minute limit.
Yes.
I will put 3 minutes on the clock. More for me than really for you. Okay. I don't think it'll take 3 minutes, but maybe those are famous last words. I'm gonna give you two things, this or that, and then you just answer however you wish, and feel free to skip if you so choose, if you don't want to answer.
Sorry,
Ready?
those rules are really complicated. Can you explain them again?
Whatever comes to your mind first, or if you would like to elaborate, feel free to do so.
Dangerous words. Dangerous words.
All right, I'm gonna start. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Morning or night?
Night.
For reading, digital or physical books?
For pleasure, physical. For editing, digital.
And then for reading as well, Tahole or bug?
Bug.
Dragons or dinosaurs?
Dragons.
Comedy or drama movie?
Comedy.
Beach or mountain?
Both.
Zombies or vampires?
Vampires.
Ninjas or pirates?
Ninjas.
Guacamole or salsa?
Skip.
Babies dressed as animals or animals dressed as humans?
Skip.
Passenger or driver?
Driver.
Wine or beer?
Skip.
Pen or pencil?
Pen.
Calling or texting?
Calling.
French fries or onion rings?
French fries.
Burger or hot dogs?
Burgers.
Free lunch or free dessert?
Free lunch. It includes a dessert.
Snail mail or email?
Email.
Puppies or kittens?
Skip.
Ooh. Lake or ocean?
Ocean.
Beginning or end?
End.
All right. Hey, you did that under 3 minutes.
I thought
When-
all
I know.
Irishmen were contractually obligated to always pick beer, and specifically Guinness, when they answered such questions. Is this why you skipped?
When we've finished recording, if you want, I'll explain some of those answers.
Yes. Yes, yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Shall we call it then?
I'm good. Or
I'm very.
sorry, one last thing. AP, I know you're a guest, but did you have anything that you wanted to say or chastise us on, or questions to ask us?
Well,
Give Ashman a good ribbing.
Well, what I can say is I really enjoy the fact that you're doing this podcast, you're doing this read along, and I know, particularly Panda, that there are aspects of these books that you don't like, but you're still reading through it. You're still keeping an open mind, and I am so impressed because obviously I'm old, and when we had that comment from Ridley Scott earlier about millennials and blah blah blah, I look at groups like this that are younger people, not younger because I'm old,
Ashman's young.
I am.
who keep an open mind about literature that's not necessarily what they would have chosen, who are willing to engage in reading and thinking about things. And this is such an optimistic vision of what the future is. We have people doing this. You've got a podcast, you have a following, you're doing that. There are people interested in this. And so I just wanted to say thank you very much, because this is so affirming about the future of the genre, about the future of literature, that we have genuine people, even if it's not their thing, willing to engage and not being closed-minded about it and not dismissing things. And I really admire that. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That is
I want to
awesome
hug my microphone.
encouragement. What? Sorry, Kieran?
I said I wanted to hug my microphone.
Well, it's a good thing we can't see exactly what you're doing right now, then, isn't it?
Shutting off this
I don't know what
video.
happened to my camera.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for those wonderful words. That is awesome encouragement, and I will remember that the next time I want to throw a Malazan book across the room.
Should we just isolate that sound clip and you can play it to yourself for encouragement after every long chapter?
I will have a recording of it. Thank you. That's it for our time with Dr. Canavan. Thank you, AP. It's been a pleasure, I hope. Please check out AP on YouTube as A Critical Dragon, and Hurinfan cannot recommend your stuff enough. Green Team will be starting Bone Hunters in January, so stay tuned. That concludes this episode. If you want to join the read along and or contribute listener questions, check us out on the Legendarium's Discord. You can find the link on thelegendarium.com. Also follow us on Twitter at Green Team Pod for updates and fun times. And AP is also on Twitter at A Critical Dragon. Check out the Legendarium podcast for Wheel of Time, Cosmere, Lord of the Rings content, and so much more. Thank you to our panelists, Ashamon, Yasna as a Boy, Hurinfan. I'm Befuddled Panda. Until next time, goodbye.